Hello, my name's Kevin Hillary. You're here because you're taking some time out of your fun fair to learn a little bit more about the emerald ash borer that is coming to Oregon. Well, it's here in Oregon, but it's going to come to the fair at some point. I am the fair arborist. I've been an arborist for my whole career, for about 40 years, and been the fair arborist through 3 site managers, so since about the late 80s. And I'm going to give a talk about the emerald ash borer. It's going to kind of be a whirlwind talk. I'm going to tell you what it is, a little bit about ash trees, symptoms, how it spreads, and what we're trying to plan to do about it. So the emerald ash borer is a very small half-inch, so fits inside a penny, so very small adult stage insect. It's emerald color. It's the metallic green color, which I found very interesting that there's a huge family of beetles that have that kind of metallic green color. And I looked into that. I was like, why? Because it seems like such a hard thing to do. It's very beautiful for something so destructive. But the metallic green is, they still don't know why insects do that, but the 2 guesses is that one is for mating, to be colorful for mating. The other is that it could be camouflage, because like a drop of water that reflects the sunlight turns colorful. It's kind of the same cut pattern in their body as like a CD. If you turn a CD over and you get that kind of prism look. And it doesn't cost the beetle a lot to do that, as some beetles have a much stronger exoskeleton to them. But the emerald, metallic emerald body is cheap for them to manufacture. It's invasive species, so that means it comes from somewhere else. It did not co-evolve with our trees. It comes from East Asia. There it is, so it's not invasive there. It comes over here, and that's why our trees have such a hard time dealing with an insect like this. There's a lot of lookalikes, very, very similar. There's Oregon Department of Agriculture came out with this. This is a web page that we photocopied, and it's good to have an educated populace, because we're going to be seeing these. There are already some very similar beetles around the fair that look like dead ringers for the emerald ash borer. They're generally a bit bigger, and they don't have that rice shape, like that narrow body and big black venomous eyes. One other interesting thing about the emerald ash borer, or the metallic green, that I was kind of fascinated with, was that back in the 1800s, the first sequin dress was made out of beetle wings, not the emerald ash borer, but that same family, where it was that beautiful metallic green. This woman named Ellen Terry, who was a famous actress, a world actress, then was doing Lady Macbeth in London. And they had thousands of emerald ash wings that they put to her dress. And it's like an iconic dress, actually, and it's in a museum in London. So it's one of the most famous old dresses that's a rabbit hole I went down one night on the internet. So that's how pretty it is, but pretty destructive. So ash trees are it's the main tree it goes after. Ash and olive. It decimates the ash trees. The olives it is attracted to. It would prefer ash tree, but California has to worry about the olive plantations as it comes to. They're super afraid. We don't have very many olives here, but we do have a lot of ash. We are actually surrounded by ash trees. The only other trees I can see is the willow right there with a hollow, and the 9-bark here. But every tree that you can see here is an ash tree. There's a particularly large one there. Interesting enough, so they've got the compound leaves that you see. So they have that's actually a 1 leaf, and then they split off from that into those different leaflets. It's the only tree around here that does that. Other trees like have a different color. So that one over there, the darker green, is an oak. That's our native Oregon white oak. But in a good example of a big leaf is right next to it. That big leaf maple is actually the tree underneath where they do yoga. That's one of the nicer big leaf maples here. So you can see how many, the big population of ash trees that the fair does have. Ash, like really not the best soil conditions. They do really good in crappy soil where no other trees really want to be. They like soggy feet. So the fair is a flood site. It floods several times during the year, and ash thrive with soggy feet. It's also crappy soil for other trees because when you have floods, it takes a lot of the oxygen out of the soil. And for some reason, ash love that. So they're really populated in like swamps. So if you can picture swamps, we actually have ash swamps here in Oregon, or swales is what they call it. They do really, really well in harsh conditions, and that's why they're very grove-like in those conditions because no other trees do really well. I get asked a lot about the mountain ash, the so-called mountain ash, but that's the one with the really bright orange clumps of berries that are lots in the urban environment. And the emerald ash borer does not. That tree is in the rose family, and the ash does not affect that tree at all. It's a popular city tree because it does so well in crappy environments. The soil in the cities are notoriously bad soils, and so like in Portland, they did a tree inventory, and there's 9,000. It's mostly not Oregon ash, but there's 9,000 ash trees in Portland, and they've done an inventory here in Eugene. I don't know exactly how many. But most of the information that we're finding out about ash in the emerald ash borer is coming from urban environments. So take that when you hear something about the emerald ash borer, know that that's where the data is coming from. Very few people are going into an environment like this and doing studies. So we're borrowing that technology and trying that information and trying to apply it to places like this. So the symptoms that you see with the emerald ash borer. Well, wait a minute, I didn't talk in their life cycle when I talked about the emerald ash borer. So what happens is the adult is very small, half-inch, and then what happens is they mate. They then lay eggs. The female lays the eggs on the outside of the bark in the crevices of the trees. As you can see this ash tree, it's got that crisscross pattern in it. And they're very small, really impossible to see the eggs. That happens in the spring. The larvae then hatch. The larvae are kind of like a little worm-like thing. They burrow into the tree, and that's where the damage actually happens. The emerald ash, the adult, does not actually do very much damage to the tree. It eats the leaves a little bit, but the larvae is the thing that happens inside, underneath the bark. They do galleries, so they S-shaped galleries. And this is how they kill the tree. Generally you can see that in any kind of wood, in the live edge wood, you can see these galleries where beetles are doing. So that disrupts the transportation of water and nutrients up through the tree, and it basically girdles the tree. And the larvae are actually disturbingly large compared to the adult. There's a life cycle in winter in states that have actual winters where it takes 2 years. In Oregon, where we don't really have a winter, it's their life cycle will probably be only 1 year. So they will emerge. They'll spend most of the winter in the tree doing the damage, doing the eating and doing the S-shaped galleries. They emerge as adults in D-shaped holes in the bark, come out, and they generally start coming out in May, and they're in flight. You see them mostly May, June, and July, and then they taper off. And that's when the eggs hatch and the larvae start going into the tree. So the symptoms, once the emerald ash borer is here, and the symptoms when they start attacking trees are really hard to see and happen late in the cycle of the tree dying. By the time you see any symptoms, it's pretty much the tree's already been populated and it's almost too late. The first symptoms are top-down crown dieback, which is the top parts of the trees, the top highest branches from the roots start dying back, and then you'll start seeing suckers or epicormic shoots from the trunk of the tree. So that's fast growth at the very base of the tree that the tree's trying to replace what it just lost. And it's very fast, looks like a toilet brush kind of growth at the base of the tree. It can go somewhat higher in the trunk of the tree. And then another interesting symptom, which I've never seen before, is that there's so much beetle activity, and it generally happens in the top of the tree first, is woodpecker activity. And they come in and they start going after the larvae, and they start flaking off the bark. And there's something called ghost trees where they actually change the color of the trunk of the tree because they're so active. So if you start seeing a lot of woodpecker activity, that shows that there's a lot of insects or larvae in the trees. But by the time you see it, it's been there for a while. How does it spread? Well, it came to the United States through Asia, East Asia, through possibly infested shipping containers, and arrived in Detroit probably it arrived in the 90s, but it was discovered in 2002. Because remember, it's hard to find them because by the time you see any of these defects, it's already been there for a while. So they figure it arrived in the 1990s. And again, first discovered in 2002. An interesting thing, it's not just that an invasive species hitched a ride on shipping containers and came over here to Detroit. The story actually starts a little, it's a little longer than that, where back in the turn of the century, the 1990s, the North American ash trees became popular in China. So we started shipping North American trees to China and Japan because it's a great tree for urban environments, for hard places. They started to use it for plantations. It is an ornamental. And then there is quite a few of them in the 60s and 70s. And then the emerald ash borer had an outbreak in 1982. Before that, the emerald ash borer was a pretty much unknown insect in China. But when we brought over the ash trees, the ash tree is basically a novel host. You have an invasive species. We brought a novel host over to China that made them a huge outbreak because that tree never evolved with them. And that's where the problem started. And then they had a first outbreak was in 82. That's where the Chinese scientists were had to, okay, we've got to really investigate what this thing is because it wasn't a problem before that. There was another outbreak in some Chinese provinces in the 1990s. I don't know if Wuhan was one of them, but there was. And then, coincidentally, that's when it came over to Detroit. So it's a cautionary tale that, especially when we start talking about assisted migration. I don't know if you ever heard that term, but with the climate change, that's a popular term where us humans really want to help the forest. And as the climate warms, we want to start bringing the forest south of us up north and find trees that are suitable here. So there's a lot of people talking about, what redwoods or sequoias will be good up here. But it's going to be hard having human intervention in forests. And whenever we talk about what trees to plant, sometimes there's unintended consequences to our actions. And the emerald ash borer is a good example that if we move a bunch of trees from the south up here, there's all sorts of insect activity that we have no idea that might happen. So it spreads. It started in Detroit, Michigan. They immediately put up a quarantine to try to stop any kind of the spread of the wood, so it spreads through firewood, live edge lumber, and nursery stock. The quarantine wasn't that successful because nursery decided that it wasn't going to apply by the quarantine, and they started shipping ash trees to Ohio and Virginia. There's a lot of talk about whether quarantines actually work, but what it really takes is an educated populace. So to get the word out, so hopefully people who are making decisions like this nursery know the consequences of their actions. And so that's how it started spreading out of Michigan, and now it's in 36 or 37 states and 6 Canadian provinces. So it's an incredibly successful beetle that's spreading around. It also spreads through firewood. That's one of the main. It really spreads through human intervention. The beetle itself only can fly not very far. That doesn't have a lot of reserves in it, and it's wind assisted. They say it flies maybe 10 miles a year, but all the spread has been human intervention in the United States. The last outbreak was in Boulder, Colorado in 2013, and the Rocky Mountains stopped it for quite a while. So it probably came over. They still don't know why it arrived in Oregon. It's showed up last year in June, end of June last year in Forest Grove outside of Portland. And they still don't know why or what caused it. They don't think it's shipping containers. So it was either firewood or nursery stock that came into the Forest Grove. The beetle came from, what's the question? Whether the trees or the... This introduction of beetles came from East Asia. I can't hear you.
It's a novel introduction, like what happened.
So it's the same species, the same family. That so you're saying, did it come from China over to Forest Grove? I don't actually know. A pretty good question. We are all assuming it came from the east side of the Rockies. It could have come over from China. Yeah, we don't know. But so that's a good perspective. China could still be spreading it, but shipping containers. But if it was probably from China, they actually thought it was going to appear in Puget Sound first because of what happened in Detroit. So they were really planning on it showing up in Seattle before Oregon. So that's why we think it was ash seedlings or firewood. So they set up, where am I? How's it spread? So it's in Forest Grove. They set up a quarantine around Forest Grove. It started in like June of last year. I found out about it on Country Fair Monday of last year. The Oregon's response has been amazing. They had set up a preparedness and response plan 2 years ago. And if you want to know further about it, look that up at Oregon Department of Forestry. And so they jumped on it the day it was discovered by just a hobbyist bug guy was dropping his kids off at soccer and saw some trees in Forest Grove. So let me, so that's where we're at. It spreads. So if it spreads from Forest Grove, it's going to be, it can spread through human intervention of firewood, lumber, but it also recently discovers it can hitchhike a ride on cars and even railroad trains. So if we've all come back from a trip, we've seen, bugs on our windows or on their grills, that's likely way it travels. So like I was saying, it only travels by itself, assisted by wind, about 10 miles. But if you take Boulder, Colorado in 2013, it jumped into Oregon in 2022. If you factor in time and travel at that point, the beetle actually travels by assisted human intervention 120 miles a year. So as it spreads, it's not going to spread outward from Forest Grove 10 miles a year. What's probably going to happen, it's going to pop up 80 miles from there, in maybe 100 miles from there, in just different locations, or maybe up in, it's basically the beetle is around. It's just when does it get so successful that it starts showing those signs, those late signs, and where we can start seeing it. So it's really important for us as an educated populace to know what the beetle looks like, to take pictures. There's going to be a lot of false identifications of it. If you do spot one, that's the best thing. Take a good picture of it. If you want, the next step would be to actually, you could freeze it or put it in alcohol and then contact the Oregon Invasive Species Council or Oregon Department of Forestry. Here at the fair, we haven't set it up this year, but we'll set up a beetle bottle up at Quartermaster. I think there's a Dr. Seuss rhyme there that I haven't quite figured out yet. But the beetle bottle will be up over at Quartermaster, and you can bring stuff there. People have already shown me pictures. I don't think it's here right now, but there's been rumors that it's over in Eugene. That is a huge rumor. One person told me that, but that's how it's gonna happen. A lot of people are gonna see the false positives that they're doing. So what are we gonna do about it? Well, my next prop. The title of the talk, I wish trees could move, but they didn't evolve that way. But we are pretty much looking at total forest change here in ash forest. It's near 100% mortality of these trees. It's happened through the whole East Coast. If you're from the Great Lakes or from the East Coast, you've already experienced that. There's been nothing that has been able to stop it, and the best hope is to slow it, because there are some helpful things that are coming out of the pipeline from scientists. The best biocontrol right now is parasitic wasps. And I heard that, so it's a wasp that only goes after the emerald ash borer. They've been doing 10 years of testings, and they think it's a pretty good one. It's really hard to introduce a new insect into an environment, but everything I've been reading, they've done their homework, and they've actually started. I've read one source on the internet, but I haven't followed it up by two, that they released them in Forest Grove. It doesn't it doesn't eliminate the population. It slows it down. It's like one of these natural, that's what would evolve with the trees if we had the emerald ash borer. So that's really the best way. We're not going to get rid of the emerald ash borer. It's now going to be part of our lives. We have to figure out a way to live with it and manage it. And so the parasitic wasps are one thing. Doing trap trees is another way. A trap tree is where you take an ash tree and you do a girdle of it. You take all the bark off around the base for about a 2-foot section, and that tells the beetle that the tree's stressed and really attracts the tree. They're doing that in Forest Grove. And what they do there is there is an insecticide that they inject into the trunk of the tree, and the problem with doing a trap tree is it attracts the beetles, and so they're protecting the trees around the trap trees by this insecticide, and then they set up traps, and then they try to attract as many beetles there, and then they destroy the tree in the winter once the larvae are in the tree. So we have set up some trap trees here in the Oregon Country Fair with the Oregon Department of Forestry. We're lucky enough to have a relationship with them. One of their scientists come down. This is the furthest south that there are trap trees. There's one over in Maui or Wowie. There's one over in the Tower Lot, and there's one over in the far side. So what we'll do is, and then there's actual traps, sticky traps that we've hung by these trees too. And what we'll do is in the fall, we'll go there and girdling the tree basically kills it. So in the winter, we'll take the trees down, we'll peel off the bark and see if we can find any beetles. So that's what we'll continue to do here at the fair to see when it comes. If it comes here, it's tough. Like I said, there's a quarantine in Forest Grove, so they can't move any wood. The only way to make the wood safer is to kiln dry it. So that's at about 140-degree heat treatment for about 2 hours, and then you can move wood. That's a good idea for any kind of lumber with a live edge or firewood. The firewood, it's tough. So we're all kind of used to however we get firewood. Usually we know somebody, or as we travel, we like to bring our own firewood with us, or buy it at a roadside area and then travel with it to be prepared as we show up at a campsite and bring out our wood. There used to be a rule that you shouldn't move firewood more than 50 miles or outside of ecosystems, and they just changed that here in Oregon to 10 miles, and then they changed it again, and now they have a slogan of don't move firewood, buy it where you burn it. And that's really kind of, if you think about it, that's how insects and diseases are spread. It's actually one of the nice things to come out of this really bad situation is we all need to be a little bit more hygienic. Kind of like one of the better things that came out of COVID, like one of the only, is hopefully we're a little bit more hygienic. So we need to be more hygienic about our wood. The fair has tightened up one of its regulations, so there are no more allowing firewood to come into the site. But we also added that no firewood should leave the site too. The fair has a really good possibility of being a super spreader of the beetle coming and going. Because think about our populace, how many people are here, where they all come from. So, and hopefully live edge wood right now is frowned upon, it's discouraged. And maybe next year, if I'll look at the guidelines for the fair, and that might be changed. It's a little tough to, live edge wood is beautiful, and I love it in any kind of construction. It's okay to use if you've got the wood here on site. The fair does have a wood miser mill, and they do a lot of live edge wood. That is completely okay. You're using wood here. But if someone from Forest Grove did some live edge wood and brought it down here, that would be one of the worst case scenarios. But also with Doug fir, there's a lot of beetles that can come in with Doug fir, so it's kind of a good thing to be more hygienic about what we do. Some of the other distant things we can do about it, there's a new RNA thing the scientists are working on that they can attack the beetle with. So slowing the spread of the beetle until some of these things come through is what we need to do to manage. It's also actually called SLAM, slow ash mortality. And so as a populace, if we stop moving wood, if we stop moving live edge wood, hopefully, and we get more aware, looking at the beetle, looking for the beetle, if you see something, say something, we can slow the spread of the beetle. So there's also an infrared plane that they're looking at where they'll be able to fly over forests, and through that, doing light imaging, they'll be able to tell way earlier than seeing the late symptoms of top-down dieback. They're going to be able to see the beetles in the trees through aerial footage, and that's going to help slow the spread. So if we can be a good populace and slow it down, maybe some of these things will be in our arsenal at the fair by the time it shows up. I wrote an article in the Fair Family News called "What Happens When Trees Disappear from the Forest" in the December 2022 issue of the Fair Family News. You can look into that for a lot of detail about what I've talked about today and what the fair's going to do. The fair has also started a Emerald Ash Borer Task Force. We meet every month and report to the lump committee. And just hopefully the next board meeting, the Emerald Ash Borer Task Force will have a monthly report to the board about all our activities. Some of the other things we've been doing, we're trying to do a tree inventory. And we've got, through the Oregon Department of Forestry, we've got a tree inventory program called Tree Plotter. And you can actually do inventories on your phone using GPS or maps and walk right up to a tree, put the data in on your phone, take a picture of the tree. That will go to a website, and you'll see an aerial photo of the fair, and with stem data information, which is little white dots on the tops of the trees. You'll be able to click on that and get all the information about the tree. When the data was collected, a picture of the tree, So I've already gotten some of the trees out in Chez, and by main camp already logged onto this. We're still working out the bugs, but we'll need people to help with that tree inventory at some point once we figured out whether the tree plotter program is the program for us. And in that way, we can manage what we have if we have a good inventory. There's also a statewide inventory about all the trees that have been infected, the 44 trees in Forest Grove that have been infected. It's a dashboard site. So if you Google Emerald Ash Borer, Oregon, they'll take you to this dashboard site, and you can click on the trees that have been infected and see exactly where they are in Forest Grove, all the suspect trees, and then where all the trap trees are. So it's a great resource for information if you want to know more. The next best thing we could do is start tree planting. Here at the fair, tree planting, there's been a 20-year history of tree planting. Steve Wiz was the site manager when I started. He planted around 2,000 trees. And so if you go out into Xanadu and all the 20-foot trees, were all planted by him. Most of them are ash. Some of them are oak and maple. If you go out the parking lot, the rows are marked by ash trees. So that's more of the stuff that we have to be doing. The new site manager, Sierra, has started a nursery, but we need to get a little better at it. It needs to be funded. It needs to be a little larger, and hopefully we can get a commercial or industrial size nursery started here at the fair. We're going to try to use as many of the local trees as possible. There's going to be a gigantic acorn crop this year, I've heard. We'll be collecting those in the spring when you see the maple seeds fall in the winter and their sprouts. We're collecting all those. And that's going to be the trees that are going to be most successful here, are the local trees grown at this altitude in this soil. One of the other things we're going to have to talk about as a fair family is where to plant the trees too, and what type of trees do we plant. I'm going to propose that we have a native tree planting area, and in that area we only plant trees that grow here in this area. I assume it's like the 8, but the lump committee's got to be the ones to decide on that. And then outside the native tree planting area, maybe we can play with a little assisted migration trees. See what trees might help, but do it on a slope, because there are areas of the fair that have already been, the forest is not as native. There's bialysis, there's plum trees. But there's other trees like there's a valley ponderosa pine that maybe we can get more of that. And we're on the very northern edge of the black oak, the very northern edge of it. But that's a tree that does really well in wet areas. We're in Fern Ridge Reservoir. There's a grove on the east side of Fern Ridge Reservoir that grows mainly in a flood area. So hopefully we're going to go over there and get some of those trees, start planting them in the fair. It's going to be devastating, and it's going to be quick change at the fair. So the best thing to do is doing what you're doing. It's better to know than to not know, and then to really appreciate the ash trees while we're here. It's one of the most understudied trees in Oregon, because there's no economic value. They don't know what pests go after it. They don't even know what funguses attack it. I was here in August with Dr. Dave Shaw from Oregon Department of Forestry. One of our first, what the fair did a site walk with Oregon Department of Forestry in August last year. And as we were walking, he was collecting samples of funguses to help document it. That's how little it's understood. So in the meantime, I think in the next 10 years, it's good as a group to look at these trees and really appreciate them and visualize what's going to happen next. It's going to be particularly hard because as humans, we want to help. We want to replace the forest. If the forest is going to leave, we want to put it back. But with the ash and the way that it grows in swampy areas, it might not be possible to get ready. So as a group, we're going to have to decide what areas are we going to have to plant. And there are going to be areas that are not going to be replanted, that we're not going to be able to replace the forest because of the ash's ability to grow in swampy soils. And actually, something I learned talking to Dave Shaw was that Oregon, the Willamette Valley, has an unnatural abundance of ash trees right now. That when white settlement, that's such a gentle term for what happened. White settlement came in 150 years ago, that we all heard that there was much more fires in the Willamette Valley. So those fires kept the ash trees down, and but when we stopped burning, they moved into the meadows. So if we think about, and especially the fair has been a static forest for a long time. We say we do forest management, but as humans, if we grew up here coming to the fair, we want it to stay the way it was, the way it always been. And that's actually kind of weird. And it's another subject that I've always looked at, like, where do we keep forests exactly the same? And like places like Gettysburg Battlefield, that's an environment that doesn't change at all. They will not allow it to change. But and then, like a Lewis and Clark's winter camp on the Oregon coast, when they camped, there's descriptions that they could see the ocean. But if you go to where they think the campsite is, it's a park. It's completely covered by Sitka spruces and Doug firs, and you can't see anything. I thought that was interesting. But that's what happens. There's change. What we're going to have to go through is change, but quickly. And I think there's going to be a lot more meadow at the fair in the future. It's going to look a little bit more like Xanadu than the Ritz. Because what happens, actually, another thing I found out is up by the Ritz, is as you approach the Ritz, there's this low area, and that's an ash swale. So if you come here pre or post fair, mostly pre-fair in the winter, that's an area that you kind of want to avoid, or you need rubber boots because it's always muddy and always wet. There's a swale right there. It's an old branch of the Long Tom River that starts at the Ritz, weaves it, and I've always thought it stopped there by childcare, but never followed it through. And then there's another ash swale over by Snivel, and then out by Traffic Camp. I just learned that is actually a whole branch of Indian Creek that used to be. So there's a whole old stream bed, historic of mainly ash trees. And we're going to lose those ash trees, and it's going to be difficult to replace that whole forest. As a group, we may decide to try to do it, but what naturally was there 150 years ago was a meadow. If you come here pre-fair, you know how beautiful the wildflowers are in this meadow area. So maybe that's what used to be here. Maybe we should prepare ourselves for that to be a future look of the fair. So more wildflowers. I think that's about all I'm going to say right now, and available to take questions.
Are willows a good candidate to replace a lot of this stuff?
Yeah, so willows, there's one right behind you, hollow, yeah. So willows are fantastic. They don't like the swales as much, but we'll be in, I think a lot of the forest will be a smaller forest here. We'll still have the big, it'll be more oak savanna, big leaf maple, but crabapple and vine maple and willows.
I see a lot of willows. I kayak up at Stiff Ivy Lakes in Portland, and it's inundated with willows. And so
Right.
they do live in that really super wet environment that's almost always wet.
Yeah, so that's one of the big problems with losing the ash forest is they're a good riparian zone like Bybee Lakes, and they shade the water and keep it cool. So something that's really good is to try to do shrub planting near the Long Tom to keep it nice and cool. And I actually did talk to one person. So what the cities are doing right now is they stopped a couple years ago from planting ash trees. So, and a guy just yesterday asked, I bought ash trees last year. I have some ash seedlings, so should I plant them? And I told him, well, if you've got a limited space, that's not a very good investment to plant trees. But if you've got, a riverbank, you could still plant ash trees with the thought that they're going to die, but the beetle likes the bigger, older, stressed trees. Those are the trees that's going to attack first. Those are the trees that are going to die first. Those are the trees that first come down. If we still plant ash trees along the Long Tom, they'll be 10-footers. The beetle's not going to attack those trees for a while. So we'll still be able to keep the Long Tom cool, and it's going to be hard to plant ash trees knowing that they're going to die. But I think if you look at them as short-term trees.
There's also Asian ash varieties that evolved with the beetles that are more resistant to it.
Right. So so when we brought North American trees over to Asia, we brought a novel host over, and so that's something that could be to happen is we bring a novel host here, and maybe there's an obscure beetle that would attack that. What they do try to do is I can't say it's total species destruction. It's gonna be close because sometimes there are a couple of varieties of ash trees that have resistance. So that's why we probably won't do preliminary removal of ash trees, but we have so many ash trees here that there's long strips along the South Woods out by Maui and Waui on the parking lot where I think we'll just probably have to abandon those areas for a while. And if there's any trees that are resistant, they'll appear. But that's something that the scientists are also working on that I forgot to mention. That that's happened with the American chestnut tree. There was a big blight that happened at the turn of the century, killed all the American chestnuts. They're working on trying to come up with a disease-resistant chestnut. Same thing with the elm tree. And another interesting thing, so all the elm trees have died, and they're trying to come up with a resistant tree. One thing I didn't mention about the beetle is with the elm tree, the disease was spread by a beetle. It was actually a fungus on a beetle, but I never saw that beetle. Same thing, birch trees are now leaving us in the urban environments, and there's a bronze birch borer that is attacking them. Most of the birch trees have left Portland. I've never seen that beetle. I met a guy, I've been to 2 conferences about the emerald ash borer, and I met a guy he was from Bartlett. He's General Tree. And he was the one who took down 2 more trees this year, and he had photographs of the beetle, like 6 when he took down the trees, there were like 6 beetles on his back and about 10 on his truck. So it's a beetle that we are going to see. They're very prolific. As if we come to fair and the beetle is here, we're going to see him. Steve.
So when the speed shows up, what's going to happen? Because I heard in Forest Road, the Department of Forestry said we got to go and cut every ash tree in the quarter mile. Is that going to similarly happen here?
So Steve asked if when the beetle comes here, like Forest Grove, the Oregon Department of Agriculture put a quarantine on the area and took the trees down immediately. Right. So what's going to happen here? So that's the big question. It's not if it comes to the fair, it's when it comes to the fair. If we can hold it off for about 10 years, and it spreads hopefully up by Portland and slowly creeps down the valley, they're going to start throwing up quarantines in the next county it shows up, and then the next county it shows up. But then at some point, 3-4 counties, quarantines aren't working. They're going to drop the quarantine. And
I don't know what a quarantine is, but I heard they told everybody, all the landowners within a quarter mile of the first beetle, they had to remove the trees.
that's not what happened. Because they can't, as a government agency, they can't go into your backyard and tell you have to, that might be a good thing, but it can't happen. So they can't. They took all the trees that are infected. I don't think any of the trees that got infected were backyard trees. Every one that I saw was a street tree, and they were able to remove those. So, but when it comes to the fair, I don't know if there's going to be a quarantine happening then now, or I assume there will be a quarantine. So what's going to happen is our trees are going to flag. We have such a population of ash trees, we're going to start having to take down trees quick. And we won't be able to move them. We're going to have to come up with a method of howing to deal with these trees. Chipping them is a very good option, but it's going to be tough because they say you've got to chip them to 1-inch wood chips. So if you've ever had wood chips or delivered to your property, they're more like wood shreds. They're really long, unless your chipper blades are sharp. So it's 1 inch on 2 diameters of the chips. So that's legal. Or burning them. And that's a little tough because of DEQ and air quality. So there's a couple of new ways to do. There's air curtain incinerators, which is a controlled burn, and the exhaust is not bad. Or the best hope is biochar, where it's trying to make them into charcoal. And what happens then, which is a great thing that hopefully the fair will do, because trees do such a good job sequestering carbon, And if we can lock it up and turn it into charcoal, that'd be a great thing for the fair to do. But burning them, kiln drying, or lots of firewood, lots of bowls, lots of spoons. Yep.
This here. This year, you guys have gone back to Boulder, Colorado, 20 years there now. What does that area look like? What have they done with that land?
What do the areas look like that have already been infested?
In Boulder, Colorado, yes.
That's really a good question. What does Boulder, Colorado look like right now after being infected in 2013? It happens really. So again, once they find it, it's late. So I assume I'll look that up. Because most of the stuff in Detroit, all the way down to Louisiana, I've just heard of. As you drive along, you just see rows and rows and rows of dead trees. I don't know what's gone on in Boulder, Colorado, and how mass the dieback has been. That's a really good question.
Yeah, we talked about oak and maple and willow and canna. Some of the trees that come to mind include like black cottonwood, red cedar, scissor dogwood, redwood, cherry, and those options also being explored.
I think most trees are being considered. And again, it's whether you want to do it as native or do you want to start pushing with assisted migration. Oregon Department of Forestry came out with a really good webpage about what trees to replace ash with. And if you just Google Oregon Department of Forestry, what to replace ash with, they did some fantastic work. You're going to be most successful if you see what kind of soil you have. What's your soil type, acidic, pH, wet or not, and they have a whole list of all the trees that do good in the dry areas, the wet areas, and all the trees you mentioned. For here, you mentioned alder. Obviously, the fair's got to do that. Pacific dogwood. Cottonwood's going to be a little trickier. That grows a little fast, and it's really brittle as it grows. It's an option, maybe not in the populated area, but maybe along where the riverbank is. And that's another thing I failed to mention. Once the beetle does attack the trees and we start seeing those late symptoms, ash trees become really brittle fast. So much so that arborists from other areas of the United States have started to become rules about climbing and taking down the ash trees, is that once you have 20 to 30% of dieback at the top, they won't allow climbers to go into the trees anymore because they become so unsafe. It's going to be an interesting and fast situation for the fair once the trees start dying. Question.
Do you know what percentage of trees are ash in the fairgrounds? What percentage?
I wish I did. We've started the tree inventory program, but we're having problems with the GPS because if anybody's using their phone, know the problems we're having. So what percentage of ash are? I've heard a couple of percentages. It's really high, and all of them are guesses. But in one meeting with Steve Wiz, who knows it's the old site manager, he says we're talking about thousands and thousands and thousands of trees. Very large areas. So there's areas. Any of the low areas is mostly ash. As soon as you gain any kind of elevation, get out of the floodplain area, it starts becoming mixed forest. So
You could do early spring or late fall canopy color aerial photo. Would give you an ash ratio.
right. So one of the better early detections is aerial photos, as Tom mentioned. Canopy percentage. Right. Yep. That's something that the fair has to do is more aerial. And another thing is money. The fair needs a lot of money for this. And hopefully within a month or two, I'll have, working with Lump Committee, come up with a tree planting plan, which is, of course, so hard to figure out what to plant and where. And we're going to need money faster than the fair can come up with it. So there'll be a donation page set up at the fair family site. And hopefully we won't miss too many more planting seasons and start getting trees planted in areas of the fair. If you're a part of the fair family and you've got a booth or a campsite, look around. We're going to start asking booth owners to do a survey, impact statements of their booths, and all campsites to do impact statements. There's going to be hopefully some of the bigger campsites like Traffic Camp, it's like 3 acres. They might get organized faster than most and start fundraising and getting trees in the ground this winter, maybe next spring. We've only got 5 minutes left. A couple questions? That is so hard. It's so I've been to many meetings, and and it's nearly 100% mortality, or another way to say it is like 98%. It's almost total. Sorry. So yeah, the trees dry. So the trees die back if allowed to before taking them down. At some point, there's going to be so many trees that they'll be allowed to naturally die and hang out. Tops will die back. The trees will blow up into suckers or epicormic shoots and lose their top. And I've been hearing that it'll stay in that form for quite a while. Well, it'll be a dead top. It'll break, and there'll be short trees with lots of sprouts on it.
Oregon ash is closest relative to green ash from east of the United States, and green ash has no resistance whatsoever. So by everything that I've heard, I would anticipate it being.
Yeah, that comment was green ash is very close to Oregon white ash, and that's been, as far as your opinion, 100% mortality, which is the big option. Thank you so much for coming. Look to the Fair Family News. I'll probably write another article about tree planting in the next issue. Become informed. Look up the Oregon Department of Forestry is doing a fantastic job. They have a preparedness plan set up. Educate yourself. Talk to your friends. I'm available all fair to talk if you have any more questions. Thank you very much. I'll clap. Oh. Wait a minute. My daughter was here. I had a dad joke for her. And I missed it, but she calls me the borer of bad news.